Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. My name is Elaine, and I'm 58 years old. I've lived in the same peaceful suburban neighborhood for more than 2 decades, and there's a certain comfort that comes with the familiar rhythm of this life. Quiet mornings, evening walks, the scent of freshly brewed coffee drifting through the kitchen as the sun climbs over the horizon. Everything has its place, and I've grown to love that quiet kind of certainty. My best friend, Lorna, and I met when our kids were in kindergarten. We bonded over late pickup lines and lost homework, birthday parties, and bake sales. She was my mirror in many ways. Witty, fiercely loyal, always ready with a cup of tea and a knowing look. Over the years, we became each other's chosen family. We celebrated milestones together, weddings, job promotions, even divorces. And our kids grew up like cousins, comfortable enough to raid each other's fridges and show up unannounced. Her son Jordan was always the sweet one, wide-eyed, curious, and just the right amount of awkward that made you want to tuck him under your wing. I watched him grow from a skinny little boy who used to call me Aunt Lainey into a thoughtful, tall young man with a quiet confidence. He moved away for college, came back with a degree, started working in marketing, and somewhere in all that, grew into someone I hardly recognized, but felt strangely drawn to. It was last summer when he returned to help his mother after her knee surgery. He'd visit her in the mornings before work and stop by again in the evenings. Since Lorna was on strict rest, I'd often bring meals over or help out. Our interactions were usually brief, a wave, a laugh, a shared moment over the dishes. But there was something different in his eyes now, something I wasn't used to seeing from someone who used to leave peanut butter fingerprints on my glass table. One warm evening in July, I was sitting in my backyard, sipping iced tea, and reading one of those novels where nothing really happens, but the prose feels like silk. The air was thick with the scent of honeysuckle and the low hum of cicadas. I heard the gate creak and looked up to see Jordan walking in, hands in his pockets, wearing that easy smile of his. "Hey," he said, settling into the chair beside mine. "Mom said you were out here." We talked, mostly small things. He told me about his job, how he was thinking of applying for a promotion, how odd it felt being back in the neighborhood where he used to ride his bike until the streetlights came on. I listened, occasionally stealing glances at him. His voice had matured into something deeper, his manner more measured, more intentional. There was a pause then, one of those rare silences that didn't feel awkward, just full. He looked at me, really looked at me, and asked, "Can I ask you something personal?" I gave a soft smile. "Of course, Jordan." He leaned forward a bit, his fingers toying with the condensation on his glass. "Do you ever regret not doing something just because you thought it wasn't appropriate?" I felt my breath catch slightly, not from surprise, but from the intimacy of the question. It was the kind of thing people ask when they've already turned it over in their own mind a dozen times. "That's a big question," I said carefully. "Yes. I think most of us have moments like that, where we hold back because we're worried what others might think, or because we're scared of how it might change things." He nodded, his gaze steady on mine. "What if it's not wrong, but just unexpected?" I could feel something shifting between us, slowly, softly, like a page turning in the wind. I saw the sincerity in his eyes, the respect, but also something else. Something unspoken and tentative. "I think those are the moments that stay with us the longest," I whispered. The air felt heavier somehow, like the evening had leaned in to listen. I tried to shake off the sensation, to remind myself that I was talking to my best friend's son. But something inside me was stirring, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not just attraction, it was curiosity, wonder. maybe even a longing I hadn't realized was there. After that evening, things didn't go back to the way they were. Jordan started dropping by more often, sometimes with a bottle of wine, sometimes just to talk. He'd sit close, but never too close. He never crossed a line, but he'd linger at the edge of it, as if waiting for me to step toward him. One evening, after Lorna had fully recovered and things were settling down, he invited me out for coffee. Just the two of us. "I owe you for all the help with Mom," he said casually, but the look in his eyes told me this wasn't just gratitude. We sat at this little cafe downtown, tucked in a side street that was quiet and mostly empty that afternoon. The smell of roasted beans and cinnamon filled the air. He asked about my life, my dreams, the things I still wanted to do, the places I longed to visit. No one had asked me that in years. I felt seen, not just noticed, but understood. And then, as we walked back to the car, he stopped, turned to me, and asked a question I'll never forget. If the world didn't care, if no one else mattered, would you say yes to me? My heart pounded, my mouth went dry. I looked up at him, my thoughts a whirl of questions, fears, and something dangerously close to hope. I opened my mouth to respond. And just then, a breeze swept through the trees, stirring the moment like the rustling of old memories. I didn't answer right away. I wasn't sure how. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept replaying his question in my head, over and over, like a song I didn't know the words to but couldn't stop humming. If the world didn't care, if no one else mattered, would you say yes to me? There was no accusation in his voice when he asked, no pressure, just a quiet, sincere invitation to be honest. I lay there in the dark, the hum of the ceiling fan above me blending with the rush of my thoughts. Part of me felt like I had stepped into a story that wasn't mine to tell. Jordan was Lorna's son. I had watched him grow, celebrated his birthdays, dried his tears when he scraped his knee. And now here he was, grown, self-assured, and looking at me like I was someone he truly wanted to know, not as a family friend, not as his mother's confidant, but as a woman. A woman with a past, with regrets, with a heart still capable of stirring. The next morning, I made coffee but forgot to drink it. I folded laundry but left it half-finished. Everything felt surreal. When Lorna called to ask if I could help her pick up some groceries later, I agreed without hesitation. I needed to stay grounded, to remember what normal looked like. But when I pulled up in front of her house and saw Jordan's car parked out front, that quiet flutter in my chest returned. He met me at the door. His smile was soft but uncertain, and I could tell he wasn't sure if I'd bring up what had happened. Or more importantly, what hadn't. We went through the motions of unpacking groceries, helping Lorna settle in with her tea, and catching up on our latest book club drama. But there was a charged silence between us, unspoken but thick, like storm clouds just beyond the horizon. Later that afternoon, as I stepped out into the backyard to water her plants, I felt him follow. I didn't turn around until I felt his presence beside me. "I shouldn't have asked that yesterday," he said quietly, his hands in his pockets. "It put you in an awkward place." I glanced at him, then back at the hibiscus bush I was pretending needed my full attention. "No," I said. "You asked an honest question. That's not something to apologize for." He stepped a little closer. "I just didn't expect the look in your eyes after I said it. I thought you'd laugh it off, or tell me to grow up." "I almost did," I said, a wry smile touching my lips. "But I didn't, and that surprised me." He nodded, then fell quiet. I could feel him searching for the right words, and I appreciated that he didn't rush them. "I know this is complicated," he finally said. And if you told me never to bring it up again, I would respect that. But I also know what I feel when I'm around you. It's not just attraction. It's deeper than that. You listen in a way no one else does. You look at me and see me, not who I was as a kid, or who I'm supposed to be. That hit something inside me I hadn't even known was aching. I set the watering can down and turned to him. His eyes were open, honest, and just the slightest bit vulnerable. That vulnerability is what made everything feel so real. I've spent most of my adult life doing what was expected, I said softly. Raising kids, taking care of others, maintaining appearances. And somewhere along the way, I forgot what it felt like to be looked at the way you're looking at me now. A warm breeze swept across the yard, carrying the scent of lavender and damp earth. Jordan didn't speak. He just reached out and gently touched my hand. Not possessive, just steady. We stood there like that for a long moment, hand in hand, eyes locked, not needing anything more. Later that week, he invited me to an art exhibit downtown. It wasn't anything fancy, just a local event at a renovated warehouse space filled with abstract sculptures and moody lighting. But it was the way he asked that stayed with me. I want to spend time with you, he said. No expectations, no weirdness, just you and me. And so I said yes. We walked slowly through the exhibit, sharing thoughts on pieces that confused us or made us laugh. He made me feel young again, not in a foolish way, but in a way that reminded me I still had chapters left to write. He didn't just make me feel wanted. He made me feel interesting, seen. Afterward, we stopped for dessert. The little bistro was nearly empty, lit with flickering candles and soft jazz in the background. He leaned across the table, his fingers brushing mine as he said, "I don't want to pretend anymore." "Neither do I," I whispered. The ride home was quiet. Not uncomfortable, just full. As if both of us knew the significance of what we were stepping into. When we reached my driveway, he walked me to the door. We stood under the porch light, the air still holding the heat of the day. I could feel the space between us narrowing, the pull of something undeniable. And then, slowly, he leaned in, not hurried, not uncertain. Just close enough that I could feel his breath, warm against my cheek. "May I?" he asked. I nodded. And when his lips touched mine, it wasn't rushed or hungry. It was deliberate, tender. Like a question I had waited too long to answer. When we pulled apart, I looked into his eyes and saw not a boy, not my best friend's son, but a man, one who had just opened a door I hadn't even realized I'd kept locked. And I wasn't afraid of what lay beyond it anymore. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the bedroom curtains like a quiet whisper, and for a long time, I just lay there, still and warm, thinking about the night before. No, he hadn't stayed over. This wasn't that kind of story. But everything had changed. The kiss we shared on my porch hadn't just stirred something inside me. It had opened a door. And now there was no closing it. Not because of scandal, not because of fear, and not because of the voices that echoed in my head, reminding me who I was supposed to be. I got up, made coffee, and stood barefoot in my kitchen, holding the warm mug close to my chest. My reflection in the window surprised me. I looked calm. Not giddy or flustered, just calm. Like I'd set something down after carrying it too long. I didn't hear from Jordan that day, and I didn't expect to. That wasn't how he operated. He was giving me space, room to breathe, to think, to feel what I needed to feel. And I appreciated that more than I could say. But by the second day, I felt the ache of silence. not because I doubted him, but because I missed him. I missed the way he looked at me when I spoke, the quiet steadiness in his voice when he said my name. I missed being surprised by someone again. So I texted him, "Are you free for a walk this evening?" He replied within minutes, "Of course, 6:30. We met at the park just before sunset. The sky was a canvas of oranges and pinks, and the breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass and the distant sound of children playing. He was already waiting when I arrived, hands in his jacket pockets, eyes lighting up when he saw me. "Hey," he said, his voice soft. "Hey," I replied, unable to hide my smile. We walked slowly, side by side. Our hands brushed once, then again. Finally, I slipped mine into his, and he gave it a gentle squeeze. It felt natural, like we'd always walked this way, even if we hadn't before. "I didn't want to pressure you," he said after a while. I meant what I said. No expectations. Just us. "I know," I said, "and that's why I trust you." He stopped walking and turned toward me. "But it's not just about trust, is it?" I shook my head. "No, it's about choice. About deciding that what we're feeling is real and not letting fear make that decision for us." A couple walked past us, pushing a stroller, smiling politely as they passed. I wondered if they looked at us and saw something odd. If they did, I didn't care. "I've spent so much of my life worrying about how things should look," I said, staring up at the pink-tinged clouds. And somewhere in that, I stopped asking how they should feel. Jordan didn't say anything at first. He just looked at me with such openness that it nearly undid me. Then he said, "I think you feel like home." That brought tears to my eyes. Simple, unexpected, deeply felt. We walked until the sky turned violet and the stars began to show. Then we sat on a bench overlooking the pond. The water shimmered in the moonlight, and everything felt suspended. Time, rules, the old stories we'd lived by. "Do you think your mom knows?" I asked quietly. He exhaled through his nose, a half-laugh. "Maybe. She knows me better than anyone. But I don't think she'd be angry. She loves you. She's always said you're the strongest woman she knows." "I'm not strong," I said. "I'm just tired of hiding behind caution." He reached over, brushing a strand of hair from my face. His touch was so careful, it made my chest ache. "I don't want to rush anything," he said. "I don't even know what comes next. But I do know that when I see you, I feel peace. And I want more of that in my life." I leaned into him then, resting my head on his shoulder. The warmth of his arm around me felt like something I'd longed for without even realizing it. That night, we didn't make plans. We didn't defy anything. We just were. Two people who had crossed a threshold and were slowly learning what it meant to be on the other side. In the days that followed, we fell into a quiet rhythm. He'd stop by after work, sometimes with takeout, sometimes just to sit on the porch with me. We talked about everything and nothing. His job, my failed garden tomatoes, memories of Lorna's chaotic dinner parties. There was no hiding anymore. Just two people slowly learning how to see each other, beyond roles, beyond titles, beyond fear. And then one evening, as we were sitting by the fireplace, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, folded note. "I wrote this a couple weeks ago," he said, placing it gently into my hands. "I didn't know if I'd ever give it to you, but now it feels right." I unfolded the paper. His handwriting was neat, slightly slanted. "You once told me that life is made of small moments that stay with us. This is mine. Sitting across from you, Seeing the way you tilt your head when you're thinking, hearing you laugh like the world hasn't worn you down. I don't know what tomorrow holds, but today, I want you to know. I'm glad you're part of my story. I didn't speak. I couldn't. I simply took his hand and held it, the paper still warm between us. Because sometimes words don't need an answer. They just need a heart that's finally ready to hear them. It's strange how quietly everything shifts when the heart finally says yes. Not in grand declarations or fireworks, but in the small, steady way life softens around you. That's what happened between Jordan and me. One minute, I was standing on the edge of something terrifying and uncertain. The next, I was already inside it, wrapped in warmth I hadn't known I was missing. We started spending more time together. Not in secret, not exactly. We were careful, but not hidden. He picked me up on Saturday mornings with 2 coffees in hand, always remembering how I liked mine. Light cream, no sugar. We'd take long drives with no destination, windows down, talking about everything from childhood memories to the kinds of futures we never dared to imagine. One of those mornings, we ended up at a quiet lake about an hour outside town. The water was still, reflecting the clouds like a mirror. We spread out a blanket on the grass and just sat for a while, leaning against each other, saying little. He was quiet that day. I could tell something was on his mind. "Are you okay?" I asked, brushing my hand against his. He nodded. "Yeah, just thinking." "About what?" He looked out at the lake for a long moment, then turned to me. "About what this means. For you. For me. For my mom." There it was. The thing we danced around for weeks. "I don't want to hurt her," I said, my voice low. "Me neither," he replied. "But I also can't keep pretending this isn't real." I took a deep breath. She deserves the truth. And so do we. It was a hard conversation, the one with Lorna. I told her first, face to face, in her kitchen, hands clasped tight around a cup of tea that had long gone cold. I didn't try to explain it away or justify it. I just told her the truth, that something had changed between Jordan and me, and that it had happened slowly, respectfully, and genuinely. She didn't say anything at first, just sat there, her face unreadable. Then she asked, "Does he make you happy?" I nodded, heart pounding. Yes, in ways I didn't expect. She let out a long breath, set her cup down, and finally said, "Well, I can't say it doesn't surprise me, but you've always been more than just a friend to me. You're family, and if he sees what I've always seen in you, maybe that's not so strange after all." Tears sprang to my eyes before I could stop them. "I didn't want to lose you over this," I whispered. "You won't," she said, taking my hand. "I trust you both. And you're adults. Life is too short to ignore something that feels that real." The relief that followed was quiet but deep. It didn't erase all the uncertainty. We still had questions, still had to navigate the stairs, the assumptions, the things people whispered when they thought we couldn't hear. But that moment gave us room to breathe. From there, we allowed ourselves to live more fully. Jordan came to family dinners, sat next to me, and held my hand under the table when conversations turned loud or silly. We traveled, just once, a weekend trip to a cabin in the woods, where we cooked together, rid beside the fireplace, and talked deep into the night. He told me stories I hadn't heard before, about the loneliness he carried after college, the way he felt misunderstood in relationships that never quite fit. I told him about the years I spent pretending I was fine, how I used to measure happiness by how well I avoided disappointment. You deserve joy, he said one night, brushing my hair back as I lay with my head in his lap. Not just comfort, not just calm. Real, shaking your core joy. I didn't think I'd find that at this point in life, I said. You didn't find it, he said. You created it. There were challenges, of course. People talked. Some friends pulled away. A few eyebrows were raised in restaurants or community events when we walked in together. But most people, eventually, just adjusted. And those who didn't, well, they weren't part of the world we were building. Because that's what it became, a world. Not separate from reality, but centered in it. Built on shared laughter, long conversations, mutual respect, and this rare thing that neither of us had planned but both of us chose. Now, a year later, I often think about the question he asked me that evening in the backyard, the one that shifted everything. If the world didn't care, if no one else mattered, would you say yes to me? At the time, I didn't know how to answer. But now, looking back, I know I said yes in 1,000 ways. In the way I let him see me. In the way I stopped running from what felt too complicated. In the way I leaned into something unexpected and let it grow. We don't always get to choose when something meaningful arrives in our lives, but we do get to choose whether we're brave enough to say yes when it does. And I'm so deeply glad I did. Because somewhere between cautious glances and unspoken feelings, between the quiet walks and the unasked questions, I found something I didn't think was still out there. I found love. Unexpected, honest, and mine.